Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, often the future belongs to those who dream, especially if they're prepared to put in the hard work and take a few risks along the way. Now, in a nutshell, this is the basis of the story of our guest this week, Romeo Makhubela. He qualified as a high school teacher and could have enjoyed a rewarding but a quiet life in the classroom. Instead, he enrolled in Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and everyone said he was crazy. Why do you want to go back to school, they said. It propelled him to a career as an analyst first, portfolio manager, investment officer, and now he is the CEO of Vunani Fund Managers, a 100% black-owned investment company in Johannesburg, South Africa. A remarkable journey for a remarkable man. Now let's take a look at what the company does.
Vunani Fund Managers is really the old PQ business, Peregrine Quants. It used to be majority owned by Peregrine Holdings. And then the Vunani guys really got introduced to the business back in 2005 when they did a back-to-back BE deal, sort of at the group level. And then on the back of that, they decided to actually take equity as well in the subsidiary being PQ. That's what it used to be called at the time. And then what's sort of happened over the years, Vunani Capital, our key strategy is really to grow our footprint in the financial services arena, and we decided that from a strategic point of view, fund management is actually a key strategic element to what we are trying to do as a business. As a result, what we had to do then was to acquire a controlling interest in this business back in July 2010. And on the back of that, we're actually allowed to change the name to Vunani Fund Managers, which is what the business is currently known as. The Vunani Fund Managers is really an institutional, in the main, fund management business. What we've basically done since our launch back in January 1999 was to provide institutional investors with risk-optimized funds, which is part of what we do on the multi-asset class front. And then we've also got specialist equity portfolios, which are more for long-term investors, obviously quite aggressive in terms of their risk profile. And then we've also got bond funds, active bond funds, as well as inflation linkers, which are really appropriate for immunization of the pensioner assets out there. So for any closed pensioner sort of retirement funds that are in the market, that's what we would ordinarily put forward as an offering. We are very much an emerging business, and what we are looking to do, obviously we're working very hard, very aggressively in terms of promoting our business to the institutional investor market. I think we have made some inroads, good inroads, and that's obviously going to translate into the increase in our assets under management. So we are on a growth trajectory, and on the back of that, I think where we probably lack as a business is in the area of the representativity of our investment team. So we're going to look to introduce some senior skills in our investment, black skills, that is, in our investment team. And also, obviously, as our business grows from an AUM point of view, we're going to look to bolt on, or rather augment the client servicing area. So that team is going to expand as well. And I think from a business development point of view, just to ensure that we cover a broader aspect of the market, we will look to grow that team as well. Romeo's got an affable demeanor about him. And obviously, I think fund management is pretty much a people business. And to the extent that you're able to very quickly establish rapport with people that you're looking to gain business from and also sustain that rapport, that really goes a long way with respect to actually getting people to support us and continually support us by giving us additional business. Also, with respect to just his general management style, I think he's a very good manager. He's very consultative in the manner that he actually manages the people that he's been tasked to look after. And yeah, people generally like Romeo and people generally want to do business with people they like.
So here we are in the studio with Romeo Makhubela, the man himself. So just go right back to the beginning. You grew up in Meadowlands in Soweto. Yeah. Your parents, what sort of people were they, and what was your upbringing like?
Well, look, it's as you'd expect, with black South African my age and slightly above me. It's been a quite tough environment. The kind of education system that we got, the kind of socio-economic problems that one had to confront, to deal with you know, during those days. You know, life was quite tough. But at the same time, you know, I was quite fortunate, you know, my parents, and you know, in particular, you know, my mom, you know, and my late aunt, you know, instilled, you know, that, you know, sense of, you know, that discipline, you know, the importance of education, you know, because, you know, those days, you know, education was the only salvation, you know, you could use your education, you know, to come out, you know, out of some of the problems that I've talked about. And clearly, you know, that helped me, you know. I studied, you know, in Soweto, you know, matriculated there, you know, had a BCom degree, you know, did a BCom degree through, you know, Vista University, now called, you know, University of Joburg. Because of the influence of my family, you know, my mom was a teacher, you know, his father was a teacher, you know, my aunt was a teacher, you know, almost everyone, you know, as you know, those careers, I mean, that career, you know, was sort of, you know, to be a nurse, to be a teacher, to be a policeman, were sort of the kind of, you know, positions that one could do.
And also when you were growing up in Soweto, these were troubled times. I mean, you would have almost been too young to remember the 1976 uprising of the school children. I don't know whether you remember that.
No, in actual fact, it's amazing, you know, because, you know, I can actually share one experience. You know, I mean, you know, I remember was sent by one of our teachers, you know, to Maponya, you know, and you know, suddenly, you know, we saw a lot of high school, you know, kids, you know, marching, you know, on that particular day, and there were tear gases, you know, there were, you know, army police and so on. You know, I mean, I've actually witnessed, and quite frankly, I mean, you know, when you talk about, you know, some of the political problems in the country. I mean, in my family, you know, my brother went into exile, you know, when he was, you know, 18 years. So, you know, politics was not something that you could avoid. You know, it was something that, you know, was confronting you, and you had to deal with some of those issues.
And this affected you because in the mid-80s, when you were growing up, there was the state of emergency,
yes.
There was huge unrest in Soweto, and it led you into activism yourself.
Yes, definitely. As I'm saying, you know, I mean, when I was at university, you know, I was part of AZASO, you know, which today is called SASCO, you know, and I mean, at some stage, you know, considering going to exile was a possibility, you know, because you know, you looked at the situation and there was no hope, and the only way to address some of these things was just to fight, you know, the system, and that's how we, you know, were brought up, you know.
What about those experiences? It must have been very harrowing and difficult for you as a young man witnessing some of that.
No.
I think it affected you in your life and your business life.
No, it did. You know, I mean, it was terrible. You know, because you grew up with this hatred. You grew up with, you know, thinking terrible stuff. You know, like I'm saying, the only way, you know, to change, you know, the system, you know, was to use violence. You know, I mean, that's how we grew up. You know, because we're experiencing violence, and you thought, look, it's the best thing to do, and in hindsight, when you look at, you know, some of these things, I tend to, you know, to be scared to say, you know, why would somebody have thought things like this, you know? But unfortunately, that's the system, how the system was. You know? How
did you come through it all and end up as a high school teacher, which I suppose in some ways is the family trade, I know, but how come you ended up?
Well, look, as I said, you know, the attractive, you know, career at that particular point in time was teaching. You know, I did a BCom degree, you know, and I did a higher education diploma, you know, University of Zolule, called Ongoya, and I qualified, you know, as a teacher. You know, but even then, you know, quite active, you know, with politics. You know, was the secretary, you know, of ANC in one of the branches that I was teaching, but also, you know, with democracy coming, you know, it became quite clear, you know, around 1992 that there will be a political change in the country. And for me, that offered a huge opportunity, you know, because I said to myself, you know, with a political change in the country, there will be opportunities for black people. And I think that they stated, you know, for me, you know, to look at other possibilities. And the reason why I went to Wits Business School.
Was there a moment when you woke up one morning and thought, okay, I can do a lot more with my life as an entrepreneur and a businessman? Was there that moment?
Well, definitely. You know, I mean, you know, the opportunity, I mean, I was given an opportunity to be one of the executive directors at MMI, you know, and you know, having worked in some of these big corporates, you know, times your interests are not aligned, you know, to the business, you know, because, for example, you know, working in an insurance company, you know, you give and share options that are linked to a number of things, you know, they link to, retail, insurance, they link to EB, you know, and for me that was quite frustrating. You know, I wanted something that is linked to what I'm doing. You know, so if you want to give me rewards, those rewards should be linked to asset management. And clearly, when the Vunani, executives, you know, approached me, you know, for this opportunity, for me, it was a perfect opportunity because I could align my interest, you know, and have a shareholding, you know, in the business that I'm driving.
But before all of that, you actually enrolled at Wits Business School. As
Yes.
your friend said, you went back to school. They all
Yes.
thought you were crazy. How difficult was it to go back and be studying again after you'd been teaching others for so many years?
Well, I think initially, you know, I was looking for a job, you know, in the corporate world, you know. But, you know, you realize, you know, after having spent 5 years, you know, in teaching, you know, you've missed so many things. And clearly, you know, PDM offered that opportunity, you know, because I think it was a perfect postgraduate diploma, and it actually prepared me. And in the process, you know, the possibility of moving to corporate finance, possibility of moving to asset management were realized, you know, when I was doing that, you know, that course. And I must say, you know, it was a turning point in my life, you know, because, with that, we equipped with that kind of education, it enabled or made, you know, easy for, you know, to move to asset management.
And now you're top of the heap now. You're CEO at the very same company. How does it feel after all that you've been through? Bearing in mind we talked about your early days of suffering the unrest in Soweto, your home patch.
Well, look, I mean, I always say, you know, asset management, it's a long-term game. You know, I mean, for me being a CEO, you know, it's not. I've gone through, you know, all the processes. You know, I've been an analyst. You know, I've analyzed companies. You know, I've been a portfolio manager. You know, I've been a senior portfolio manager. I've been a chief investment officer. And when the opportunity came for me to be a CEO, you know, I took it, you know. So I've gone through all the processes. I've spent about 16, 17 years in this industry. You know, so it's not like, you know, it's somebody who's just been brought there, you know, because there's political changes. You know, I've worked hard, you know. Yeah.
Just one quick, we're almost going to a break now, but one quick question. Do you think sometimes people are rushed to the top without knowing the business behind them? Do you think that's the case?
Well, look, I mean, you do experience those kind of instances. And it's so unfortunate, you know, because, you know, empowerment at times people interpret it, you know, incorrectly, you know, and I think you have to do it in the right way. And my approach, I mean, for example, even, you know, the business that I'm running, you know, you've got a lot of experienced, you know, white, you know, investment professionals, you know, but that experience, you know, I'm using that experience, you know, to share skills with up and coming, you know, black investment professionals.
Romeo Makhubela, the CEO of Vunani Fund Managers. Hold that thought there. We're going to a short ad break. We'll be back with more after this.